Hey, Reality. All right, so it's a fairly crisp day, and I thought I'd do one of these. It's a fairly crisp topic. And talking about this idea of kind of transcendence that seems to be in a lot of blogs, and it's going on a lot of TED Talks. And I just wanted to think about it in kind of a logical way. I mean, because to me it seems like a lot of this basically follows out of number theory. I mean, it seems like phi is generally represented by, or God is generally represented by kind of phi as an idea, or at least maybe godliness. And which is, I mean, that's kind of what transcendence is aiming for, is like stepping into this next plane of existence, whatever that is. But, I mean, then you can look at it and you can basically say, okay, well, then how does it follow out? And it's like, well, I mean, above almost all other number concepts, there's the idea that there is even a place to exist or existence at all. You know, that there is something here. And so, I mean, that's kind of like the zero concept. And really the zero concept in a lot of cases for a lot of life is, are you enjoying life? I mean, it comes down to basically happiness. And so then that one, I mean, you can look at it basically kind of in a superficial way, a kind of higher level meta way, and then kind of like a micro way. I mean, because you can say, all right, superficially, like, you know, am I happy? I mean, at some level, that's just kind of a binary almost of yes, no, or, you know, gradations of gray, like, yeah, I'm pretty happy. But, you know, then you basically start cutting into it. I mean, because, you know, then you either kind of go down into it or you go kind of up a bit. I mean, you can say, okay, well, sure, I am, but then there are pieces which, you know, bug me. You know, things which I guess would say are detracting from my overall happiness, you know, parts of me that I feel maybe have been left out or something or have neglected, that kind of thing. You know, and then you can say also, okay, well, then what larger things? Things that maybe are not of me, but maybe are of larger contextual society, but, you know, that are basically dragging down my happiness. You know, maybe it's the place you are at. Maybe it is, you know, the larger state of society itself, you know, kind of the feel you get basically from the people around you, that kind of thing. You know, maybe it's your environment that you kind of locally are in all the time. You know, and it seems like everyone there is kind of down, which is then generally dragging you down. You know, and so basically you would sound like, well, how do you correct that? And you can take steps to basically correct the micro stuff, addressing each one, being like, okay, well, that thing about my life is bugging me and it's kind of dragging down my happiness, so I basically need to eliminate that. Or, you know, in the larger sense, you know, like, for example, if it's your work environment, being like, okay, well, I need to address that. I need to figure out some way to basically get these people's spirits up or to change the way that we work or the mode or something, you know, and do it maybe subtly, not like, people be happy, but, you know, do something clever that would basically change it so that everything actually kind of, you know, moves upward and you're not feeling that downward drag. Then after that, I mean, I've talked about it before, but everything kind of comes down to digestion after that. I mean, because it's kind of in number one. I mean, it's the act of existing, of being you, of being here, of being in this place. I mean, in some sense, it's, okay, well then, you know, you need to focus on you. I mean, what about you and your desires and the things that you want and kind of your existence then are kind of channeling up to that happiness, that are, you know, maybe changing that or modifying your state. And then also, I mean, just kind of thinking about the stuff that you are taking in, like literally the kind of digestion that you're doing. I mean, the things that you're seeing. I mean, are you putting yourself in places or in areas where you're seeing a lot of stuff that is basically changing your happiness either positively or badly? I mean, are, you know, hearing lots of things, basically being around that kind of stuff that would change it? And literally the food, too. I mean, you know, the food that you eat. And again, in kind of a superficial, a micro, or kind of a macro. You know, like I eat meat, but at some level I feel bad about eating the meat. And then at some level, I also feel that there's kind of a micro scale effect where it's, you know, a lot of this meat, I feel like it still has a lot of parasites and other junk that we just don't get out of it. You know, because farmers put in as much as they can to kill it, but that still, it seems like there's probably a bunch that gets through. And, you know, and as we get more and more of these things, and there are more and more people, and there are more and more ways that they can combine in interesting ways, I mean, it seems like it must kind of naturally become more challenging to keep on top of that kind of thing. But then there's also kind of a meta scale of it too, where it's like, well, you know, it kind of bugs me. I mean, at some level I'm okay with eating some meat, but then it's like, you know, it bugs me the conditions they're raised in. You know, that a lot of these things are, you know, almost kind of quasi-tortured when they're raised. And I mean, at some level it still does bother me that, like, I'm eating a being that is experiencing life. I mean, the problem is, though, is at some level you can argue that, like, a plant is experiencing life, that like all things are experiencing life. And I mean, very quickly you kind of regress down to don't eat, which I mean actually is at some level kind of, as I've talked about, escaping the dream. And maybe that is true. Maybe at the very extent of that is, you get down to eating only like mineral matter or like, fruit that is almost like karma plus, like, please eat me. And then eventually get down to just, don't eat. And then, so after moving on like past one, and then also like taking superficial like meta and then micro steps towards like as number one. Then you move on to like stuff like two. I mean, because then you're kind of getting this idea that it's like a circle with like a line through it, and so it naturally kind of has like two halves to it, two interplays to it. It has this kind of light and darkness to it. It has this order and a chaos to it, and it has naturally kind of the interplay between the sexes. I mean, whichever one you are, there's often the polarity of the other. And actually, even in cases where it's, like the attraction goes towards the same, then oftentimes there's still a polarity or a difference in that. I mean, like lesbians often talk about the fact that there's kind of like, soft lesbians and like hard lesbians, ones who are kind of pursuers, ones who are not. I mean, all this kind of stuff. And at some level, it's also getting to a point where it's like you were okay with the concept of sex as the idea. That it's something that like boys and girls do, that, that boys and boys do, that girls and girls do, that like it is done and it's kind of been done forever, that like, that like little like micro things all do it, that at some level like stellar objects kind of do it. I mean, you could argue that like suns and like black holes and stuff, the way they're arrayed, I mean, it's vaguely like that. The suns are basically putting out all this energy and it's kind of, falling down into these wells. I mean, it has all these same kind of metaphors. And as with all of these things, too, as with these ideas of 0 and 1 and 2, and the ideas of, like, digestion and sex and happiness and stuff that all kind of comes along with this stuff, too, it's then, like, seeing how that interplay basically works with the larger world as a whole. I mean, because it's looking at it and being like, oh, wow, that concept is actually a lot like digestion, like the way that company works and the way that stuff is basically kind of moving through and coming out the other side and being processed inside. I mean, that's just like a big-ass organism, or, that thing, basically the interplay between those two groups is actually kind of a lot like the War of the Sexes. One group is basically being very kind of like ordered and macho, and the other one is being very kind of like responsive and open, but at the same time like kind of manipulating and changing things. I mean, you can see this everywhere, the way that it actually plays out. It's like, reality has taken a lot of very basic concepts and then built up. And then I guess it's just kind of trying to wrap your head around all of those and, getting to a good place with them.